The Nintendo Entertainment System gave birth to quite a few Nintendo franchises: The Legend of Zelda, Super Mario Bros., Metroid. The system is a haven for classic Nintendo games. But there's one series in particular that tends to fly under the radar. It's a series that both began and ended on the Nintendo Entertainment System. A series that, while developed in Japan, was only ever released in North America and eventually Europe. And that series is StarTropics. StarTropics is one of those games that you see fairly often, but you don't really know much about. I guess the cover doesn't really help, it's just a picture of some random tropical island. But waiting inside this cartridge is a really fun, unique adventure. And the story behind this adventure is actually quite interesting. So, let's take a look. StarTropics was developed by R&D 3, one of the smaller and less well-known research and development teams at Nintendo. The group primarily worked on hardware, but they occasionally developed games as well, most notably the Punch-Out series. The idea for StarTropics came from the team's general manager, Genyo Takeda, who had a strong appreciation for the Western market. Most Nintendo games were made for the Japanese market, and then later localized for North America. Takeda wanted to see that change. The Western video game scene was getting bigger and bigger, and games needed to be made for that market to help it grow. And so began Takeda's quest to create StarTropics, a game developed specifically for North America. Upon initial boot up, StarTropics might look somewhat familiar. Save slots, heart meters, top-down perspective. It kinda reminds you of another Nintendo franchise, The Legend of Zelda. And there's a reason for that. The Legend of Zelda had a big influence on Takeda. However, instead of using a fantasy theme that was popular among Japanese gamers, StarTropics uses a modern, realistic setting. You play as 15-year-old Mike Jones, a star baseball pitcher from Seattle, Washington. One day, Mike receives an invitation to visit Sea Island from his Uncle Steve, who is looking for some lost ruins. However, upon arrival, you find out that your uncle has gone missing, and it's up to you to rescue him. Trying to find the whereabouts of your Uncle Steve is actually a refreshing story compared to the many Save the Princess type games, and near the end of the game, there are several twists and turns. Rather than battle enemies with a sword and shield, Mike Jones employs a variety of everyday items: a yo-yo, baseball bat, slingshot, spiked cleats, and more. The game is also filled with pop culture and historical references to the United States. For starters, the main character's name is Mike Jones, a combination of two extremely common names in the United States. He also happens to love baseball, America's pastime. His uncle is an archaeologist named Steve Jones, but according to the game, everyone just calls him Dr. Jones. I'm sure you see the reference here. Every single village in the game ends in the word cola, an obvious reference to one of America's favorite beverages. During your journey, your uncle leaves clues to his location, one of them being to use the code 1776 in your submarine, which happens to be the year the American colonies declared independence from Great Britain. StarTropics utilizes an overworld along with dungeons to progress through the game, and is broken up into chapters. In the overworld, you'll travel through islands and villages trying to gather more information on your Uncle Steve's location. It's fairly linear, but there are a few hidden areas and secrets to find. The dungeons are where the main gameplay takes place. StarTropics uses a top-down perspective and grid-based movement. At first, it may seem somewhat awkward. Hitting a direction once on the NES D-pad doesn't mean you start moving in that direction, but rather, you face that direction. Only after you hit the direction again do you start moving. Again, it's awkward at first, but you'll get used to it quickly, and soon find that it's essential to the combat. The dungeons are designed specifically around this movement. Each dungeon is filled with secret switches, rooms, traps, and of course, a boss at the end. As you progress through the game, each dungeon gets progressively more difficult. Luckily, the game employs a save system that saves your game before and after each dungeon area, which is very convenient. As I mentioned earlier, you'll be fighting off enemies with some unique items. Your main weapon is a yo-yo, strangely enough, But there are some other weapons you can pick up along the way, such as baseball bats and even shurikens. There are also magical items as well, so the game isn't completely devoid of fantasy. For example, this snowman doll freezes all the enemies on screen. But StarTropics isn't a perfect game. Many of the villages and dungeons feel the same, and while the music is very well done and extremely catchy, it repeats itself a lot. The plot is unique, but the writing is very basic, and the world could be more fleshed out. The grid-based combat feels limited, stiff, and slow at times. There are also some traps and dungeons that seem unfair, and you'll only discover them through trial and error. But overall, the word charm best describes StarTropics. It's such a fun, unique experience on the Nintendo Entertainment System. There are great Nintendo references too, such as the Octorok enemies from Legend of Zelda, or your ship's navigator Navcom, who bears a striking resemblance to Rob the Robot. But let's not forget one of the most unique things about StarTropics, its packaging. Specifically, something that came with the game. Remember that letter that Uncle Steve wrote to Mike, inviting him out to Sea Island? Well, the game comes with a copy of that letter, and it contains a secret to getting through the game. At one point in the game, Uncle Steve leaves a message for Mike saying, "Tell Mike to dip my letter in water." Well, this is that letter, and I'm about to show you what happens next. After you dip the letter in water, a secret message appears, with the words "frequency is 747 MHz. You must input this frequency into your navigation system to continue the game. Some speculate this was an anti-piracy, anti-rental measure implemented by Nintendo. I mean, without this code, there's no way to continue through the game. I don't know if this is actually true, but regardless, this is really cool, and an innovative way to use a game's packaging. StarTropics has all the elements of a new Nintendo franchise, and Nintendo thought so too. It was the featured game in Volume 21 of Nintendo Power, and was given a large walkthrough over 2 issues. Released on December 1st, 1990 in North America, the game was a moderate success. The game was released 2 years later in Europe. But even before StarTropics was available at retail stores, Takeda was planning a sequel, one that would be bigger and better than the first. To expand his new universe, Takeda added 2 additional screenwriters from Nintendo of America, George Sinfield and Brian Ulrich. This would not only make the story more fleshed out, but it would also get staff from North America involved in development, something Takeda felt was important for the future of Nintendo. The group bounced draft ideas back and forth, even meeting in Japan over several months to help write the story. Initially, Takeda wanted to play up the kid and professor plot with Mike and his uncle, similar to Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. But the writers eventually settled on a plot based around time travel. The sequel was officially called Zelda's Revenge, StarTropics 2. After returning to Seattle, Mike Jones and his uncle get to work deciphering an alien code they found from the tropics. After discovering the secret to the code, Mike is sent back in time and learns he must collect 7 mystic tetrads to recover the legacy of the Argonian alien race. Along the way, you'll meet several famous people throughout history, including Cleopatra, Leonardo da Vinci, and even some fictional characters like Sherlock Holmes. The writing was greatly improved over the first game. Characters have more interesting things to say, and time travel makes the environments much more varied. They also tried to work in more humor into the game, with some mixed results. However, the time travel gag is somewhat cliché, and the game is still fairly linear, with maybe even fewer secrets than the first game. Visually, Zelda's Revenge is an improvement over its predecessor. There's more action on screen, there's a much bigger variety of enemies, and everything seems a little more detailed. It's not as colorful as the first game, but that's due to getting away from the tropical environment. The core gameplay remains pretty much the same, but you're no longer confined to a grid. Zelda's Revenge introduces 8 directional movements, and even allows you to change directions while jumping. This really improves the overall combat experience, and gives you a lot more freedom. This also improves the boss battles after each dungeon. However, there are some negatives to your freedom. Jumping around is a little too fluid and can make platforming a bit more difficult than the first game, which basically guaranteed where you would land a jump. They also completely removed invincibility after getting hit. This is a huge problem in the game. Even the smallest enemies can threaten your life simply by running into you over and over again. But when you add everything up, Zelda's Revenge is a good sequel to StarTropics. It's not as good as the original, but the charm is still there, and there are even more Nintendo references. Those Tetrads you have to collect are clearly from Tetris, and while traveling through the desert, you come across a man riding a Koopa Troopa. But Zelda's Revenge didn't receive as much fanfare as the first game. One major reason was the release date. StarTropics 2 was the last game Nintendo made exclusively for the NES, released in March of 1994. It came out almost 4 years after the original, and by then, most people were playing the Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis. Another reason may have been the actual title of the game, Zelda's Revenge, StarTropics 2. If you've never played the first game, you would have no idea who Zelda is. And even then, you only meet Zelda at the very end of StarTropics. I wonder why they didn't just call it StarTropics 2. After the game's release, Genyo Takeda and his team returned to focusing on hardware. He still works at Nintendo today, with the odd title of Technology Fellow. Essentially, he is the manager of all hardware-related products at the company. And since Zelda's Revenge, we haven't seen another StarTropics game, let alone a reference or even a cameo, which is disappointing because I absolutely love this series. When Nintendo opened up a ballot for new Super Smash Bros. Characters, I submitted Mike Jones. He'd be perfect for Smash with a yo-yo and a baseball bat as his weapons, but it's doubtful we'll ever see a return to the series. Although the series was short-lived, the StarTropics games are really good and definitely worthy of your time. If you want to play the original cartridges, you're in luck. They're both fairly common and usually go for under $10 each. But you can also get the games on the Wii Virtual Console. If you decide to pick up StarTropics on Virtual Console, it does have one notable change. The yo-yo has been renamed to the Island Star. Apparently the word yo-yo is trademarked in Canada, so Nintendo changed the name to avoid any legal issues. It also comes with a digital letter that you can soak in digital water. StarTropics, we hardly knew ye. Here's hoping that maybe someday we will see you again. That's all for this episode of Gaming Historian. Thanks for watching.
Funding for Gaming Historian is provided in part by supporters on Patreon. Thank you.